The Good Morning Britain studio erupted in chaos. What happened next would destroy Judge Rinder's carefully crafted public image and make Nigel Farage the most talked-about politician in Britain overnight. Judge Robert Rinder, the 45-year-old TV personality known for his sharp wit and legal authority, thought he could humiliate Nigel Farage on live television with his usual arsenal of condescending remarks and moral superiority. Instead, Farage pulled out evidence that would expose Rinder's biggest secret and send him into a complete meltdown. That shocked millions of viewers across the UK. Rinder's face turned from smug confidence to pure panic in seconds. The cameras captured every moment as this controversial Brexit champion from Clacton prepared to reveal something so damaging that it would end Rinder's media career and prove that even Britain's most beloved TV judge could be brought down by someone who had done his homework. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that's breaking the internet across the UK and beyond, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss these incredible moments when arrogant celebrities get completely destroyed by politicians who come prepared. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about media personalities who think they're untouchable. This story is going viral faster than anything we've ever seen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Good Morning Britain had invited both men for what they thought would be a routine political debate about immigration and Brexit. The producers expected their usual format where Rinder would use his legal background and quick wit to make Farage look foolish while entertaining their predominantly liberal London audience with clever put-downs and moral lectures. What they didn't expect was that Farage had spent weeks investigating Rinder's background and had discovered something that would completely destroy the TV judge's reputation and credibility. The morning started with Rinder feeling supremely confident about embarrassing the man he privately called Britain's most dangerous politician. It was about to end with him becoming a laughingstock and facing calls for his immediate removal from television. The studio audience had packed in expecting their usual dose of Rinder's sharp legal mind dismantling Farage's populist arguments. Instead, they were about to witness the complete destruction of a television legend by a politician who had been underestimated one too many times. To understand why this confrontation became so explosive and why Rinder's meltdown was so spectacular, you need to know exactly who these two controversial British figures are and what brought them to this historic collision. Judge Robert Rinder built his television empire on one simple principle: use legal authority and moral superiority to make people feel stupid while entertaining audiences who enjoyed watching others be intellectually destroyed. Born in London in 1978 to a German Jewish mother and English father, Rinder parlayed his law degree from Manchester University and brief career as a criminal barrister into television stardom as the host of Judge Rinder. His show became massively popular precisely because it gave educated, liberal audiences permission to feel superior to the working-class people who appeared before him. Rinder perfected the art of combining legitimate legal knowledge with condescending wit, social privilege, and political correctness that he wielded like weapons against anyone who didn't share his worldview. At 45, Rinder represents everything that Brexit voters rebelled against: a wealthy, connected, London elite figure who built his career by talking down to ordinary people while pretending to represent justice and moral authority. His net worth of over £4 million came from turning legal proceedings into entertainment, where real people's problems became content for audiences who enjoyed watching working-class Britons be lectured about their failings. But Rinder's success had made him dangerously overconfident and politically arrogant. Surrounded by producers and media colleagues who shared his anti-Brexit, anti-Farage views, he had lost touch with the reality that millions of Britons disagreed with his politics and resented his condescending attitude toward anyone who supported leaving the European Union. Most importantly, Rinder had spent years using his television platform to attack Brexit supporters and Nigel Farage specifically, always from the safety of his TV studio where he could control the narrative and face no real challenge to his authority. He had perfected the art of making political attacks while hiding behind his judicial persona, claiming to be above politics while consistently promoting left-wing positions. Today, he was about to face Farage in a live television format where his usual tricks of editing and controlled environments wouldn't protect him from someone who had spent years being attacked by exactly his type of metropolitan elite figure. Across from him sat Nigel Farage, a man who represented everything Rinder secretly feared and despised. At 60, Farage had built his political career on connecting with the very people that Rinder made his living mocking working-class Britons, who felt abandoned by the political establishment and looked down upon by the media elite. Born in Kent to middle-class parents, Farage had worked as a commodities trader before entering politics, giving him real-world business experience that most politicians lacked. But what made him truly dangerous to people like Rinder was his ability to communicate complex political ideas in simple, direct language that ordinary people could understand and relate to. As the leader of UKIP and later the Brexit Party, Farage had achieved something that terrified the British establishment. He had successfully challenged their authority and won. The Brexit referendum victory represented the ultimate defeat of exactly the kind of elite opinion that Rinder represented, proving that ordinary voters could reject the condescending wisdom of their supposed betters. But Farage's greatest strength was his ability to do his homework and come prepared with facts that could destroy his opponent's carefully constructed public images. He had spent years being attacked by media figures like Rinder, and he had learned how to turn their own weapons against them. Most importantly, Farage understood something that Rinder had forgotten: television audiences could sense authenticity, and they had little patience for people who talked down to them while hiding their own hypocrisies and contradictions. The stakes of this confrontation went far beyond just one television appearance. This was about two completely different visions of Britain: Rinder's metropolitan, elite worldview where educated liberals knew what was best for everyone, versus Farage's populist approach that trusted ordinary people to make their own decisions about their country's future. Rinder had agreed to the debate because he thought it would be an easy opportunity to score political points by humiliating Farage in front of a national television audience. His usual approach was to use his legal training to tie opponents in verbal knots, while making them look foolish and uninformed. What he didn't know was that Farage had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment, researching every aspect of Rinder's background and discovering information that would completely destroy the TV judge's credibility and moral authority. The Brexit champion had come armed not just with political arguments, but with documented evidence of Rinder's hypocrisy that would be impossible to deny or explain away. This was David versus Goliath, but this time David was an experienced political fighter who had already slayed the giant of the entire British political establishment. Rinder was about to learn that his television authority meant nothing when faced with someone who had the facts, the preparation, and the communication skills to expose him as the fraud he had always been. The collision between metropolitan elite, arrogance, and populist preparation was about to create one of the most memorable moments in British television history. The debate started exactly as Good Morning Britain's producers had planned. Hosts Susanna Reid and Richard Madeley introduced both men as they sat across from each other in the studio, with Rinder looking confident and relaxed while Farage appeared serious and slightly tense. Exactly the dynamic the producers wanted. "Judge Rinder," Susanna Reid began, "you've been quite critical of Mr. Farage and his political positions. What's your main concern about his influence on British politics?" It was the perfect setup for Rinder's usual performance. He leaned back, in his chair with that trademark condescending smile that had made him famous, and launched into his prepared attack with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged on live television. "Well, Susanna," Rinder began in his polished, educated accent, "I think Nigel represents everything that's dangerous about modern populism. He preys on people's fears and prejudices, offers simple solutions to complex problems, and frankly, he's built his entire career on dividing communities rather than bringing them together." The attack was perfectly delivered with Rinder's usual combination of legal authority and moral superiority. The studio audience, filled with London liberals who shared his views, murmured approvingly at what they thought was a devastating opening statement. "He talks about representing ordinary people," Rinder continued, clearly enjoying himself. "But what he really represents is a return to the kind of narrow-minded nationalism that we thought we'd moved beyond. Brexit has been an absolute disaster for this country, and Mr. Farage bears significant responsibility for misleading millions of people." Farage listened to the attack with a slight smile, occasionally taking notes but showing no signs of being rattled or defensive. Experienced observers might have recognized this as the calm before the storm Farage had spent years being attacked by exactly this type of metropolitan elite figure, and he had learned how to turn their condescension into weapons against them. "Mr. Farage," Richard Madeley said, turning to the Brexit champion, "how do you respond to Judge Rinder's characterization of your political career?" Farage looked directly at Rinder with the steady gaze of someone who is about to deliver a devastating counterpunch. "Well, Robert," he began, deliberately using Rinder's first name to establish equality rather than deference, "I find it interesting that someone who makes his living judging ordinary people on television wants to lecture me about dividing communities." The response immediately shifted the dynamic. Instead of defending himself against Rinder's attacks, Farage had gone on the offensive, and everyone in the studio could sense that this wasn't going to be the easy victory that Rinder had expected. "But before we discuss my record," Farage continued, his voice gaining strength, "I think the viewers deserve to know a bit more about your background, Robert, because you've positioned yourself as this moral authority who can judge the rest of us, but your own record is rather interesting." Rinder's confident smile flickered slightly. This wasn't going according to his usual script where opponents became defensive and he could dominate the conversation with his legal training and quick wit. "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Rinder replied, trying to maintain his superior tone but clearly becoming uncomfortable. "Oh, I think you do," Farage said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a folder. "Because I've done some research into your background, and I think the British public would be very interested to learn about some of your business dealings." The studio fell silent. This was live television, and everyone could sense that something unexpected and potentially explosive was about to happen. Rinder tried to regain control through his usual tactic of intellectual intimidation. "Mr. Farage, if you think you can deflect from your own record by making vague accusations about me, you're mistaken. I've been completely transparent about my career and my positions." But Farage wasn't deflecting, he was preparing to attack. And what he said next would begin the systematic destruction of Rinder's reputation. "Have you been transparent, Robert?" Farage asked, opening his folder. "Because I have here documents showing that you've been involved in some very interesting tax arrangements that seem to contradict your public positions about wealthy people paying their fair share." The accusation hit the studio like a thunderbolt. Rinder, who had built his public image around supporting higher taxes for the wealthy and criticizing tax avoidance, suddenly looked very uncomfortable. "That's a gross mischaracterization," he began, but Farage cut him off. "Is it? Because these documents show that your production company has been routing income through offshore arrangements that allow you to pay significantly lower tax rates than the ordinary working people you claim to champion." The attack was devastating in its precision. Farage had just exposed the exact kind of hypocrisy that destroyed public figures' credibility, claiming to support policies that you secretly work to avoid following yourself, but this was just the beginning. Farage had much more damaging information, and he was about to use it to completely destroy Rinder's moral authority. "Tell me, Robert," Farage continued, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had caught his opponent in obvious hypocrisy. "How do you explain to the viewers why you publicly support higher taxes, while privately using the same tax avoidance schemes that you criticize wealthy Brexit supporters for using?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Everyone in the studio knew there was no good answer to that question, and Rinder's fumbling attempt to respond only made him look more guilty. "Those are perfectly legal arrangements that were set up by accountants," he stammered, his usual eloquence completely gone. "Legal, yes," Farage replied with devastating calm, "but rather hypocritical for someone who spends his time lecturing others about social responsibility, don't you think?" The studio audience, who had come expecting to cheer Rinder's destruction of Farage, were now watching their hero being systematically dismantled by the very man they had expected him to defeat. But Farage was far from finished. He had one more piece of evidence that would deliver the knockout blow and send Rinder into the complete meltdown that would end his television career. The moment that would destroy Judge Rinder's career forever was about to unfold. Farage reached deeper into his folder and pulled out what everyone in the studio could see was his most damaging piece of evidence. "But Robert," Farage said, his voice now carrying the complete authority of someone who was about to deliver a career-ending blow, "the tax arrangements are just the beginning. I think the viewers would be much more interested to learn about your private communications regarding the very people who appear on your television show." He held up a series of printed emails and text messages, and the camera zoomed in as Rinder's face went completely white. "These are private messages between you and your production team, obtained through a Freedom of Information request because your show receives public funding through various tax incentives. Would you like me to read what you really think about the working class people who provide the content for your entertainment empire?" The revelation was devastating. Rinder had built his entire public image around being a fair judge who treated everyone with respect. But Farage was about to expose what he really said about his guests when he thought no one was listening. "In this email from last year," Farage continued, clearly relishing every word, "you wrote to your producer, and I quote, 'Book more chavs for next week's episodes. The audience loves watching me put these people in their place. The more working class and uneducated they are, the better the ratings." The studio erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. This wasn't just hypocrisy. This was evidence that Rinder viewed the people who appeared on his show as nothing more than entertainment objects, to be exploited for audience enjoyment. But Farage wasn't finished with his devastating revelation. "Oh, but it gets worse," he continued, holding up another document. "In this text message to a friend, you described your own viewers as middle-class voyeurs who get off on watching me humiliate poor people. You went on to say that your show was basically poverty porn for smug liberals who want to feel superior." The words hit Rinder like physical blows. His carefully constructed public image as a compassionate judge who cared about justice was being systematically destroyed by his own private communications. Rinder tried desperately to respond, his voice shaking with panic and rage. "Those messages are taken completely out of context. You don't understand the pressures of television production. What context makes it acceptable to describe working class people as chavs for your entertainment?" Farage's voice cut through Rinder's desperate attempt at damage control. What context makes it acceptable to exploit poor people's problems for the amusement of wealthy viewers? The questions were devastating because everyone knew there was no acceptable context for such statements. Rinder sat frozen, unable to defend the indefensible. But Farage had saved his most damaging revelation for last, the one that would send Rinder into a complete public meltdown. "But here's what really exposes your character, Robert," Farage continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral authority. "This is an internal email where you discussed Brexit voters specifically. You wrote, 'These Brexit idiots are exactly the kind of ignorant working-class morons we need for the show. They're too stupid to realize we're making fun of them and too poor to sue us when they figure it out.' The revelation hit the studio like a nuclear bomb. Rinder had just been exposed as someone who not only exploited working-class people for entertainment, but specifically targeted Brexit supporters because he viewed them as ignorant and powerless. Rinder shot to his feet, his face red with rage and humiliation, all pretense of judicial dignity completely gone. "You can't do this to me. Those were private communications. This is character assassination." The meltdown was spectacular and completely confirmed everything Farage had just revealed. Instead of maintaining his judicial composure and trying to address the accusations professionally, Rinder was having a public breakdown that proved he was exactly the arrogant, contemptuous person his private messages had revealed. "Character assassination?" Farage replied with devastating calm. "Robert, these are your own words. I'm not assassinating your character, I'm revealing it." The studio audience was now completely silent, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in British television history. The man they had expected to see triumph was instead having a complete public meltdown that would define the rest of his career. But Farage wasn't finished. He had one final statement that would cement this moment in television history. "Robert, you've spent years using your television platform to attack people like me and the millions of Britons who voted for Brexit. You've presented yourself as this moral authority who could judge the rest of us from your television bench. But what you've really been doing is exploiting working-class people for entertainment, while privately mocking them as chavs and idiots." His voice rose with righteous indignation that represented millions of Brexit voters who had been dismissed and mocked by metropolitan elites like Rinder. "You talk about me dividing communities, but you're the one who built your career on class-based exploitation. You made millions of pounds turning poor people's problems into entertainment for wealthy liberals who wanted to feel superior. And then you had the audacity to lecture the rest of us about social responsibility." Then came the line that would break the internet and become legendary in British political circles. "Robert, you're not a judge, you're a performer who cosplays. Has moral authority while exploiting the very people you claim to care about. You've been exposed for what you really are, a privileged metropolitan elite who views working-class Britons as entertainment objects. And frankly, that tells us everything we need to know about the kind of people who opposed Brexit." The studio erupted in chaos. Rinder was still standing, shouting incoherently about unfairness and legal action, while Farage sat calmly in his chair, having just delivered one of the most devastating political takedowns in British television history. Show went to commercial break. But everyone knew they had just witnessed the end of Judge Rinder's career and the birth of a new Nigel Farage legend. Within minutes of the confrontation ending, British social media exploded in a way that political observers had never seen before. What Nigel Farage had done to Judge Rinder wasn't just a television moment, it was a cultural earthquake that would reshape how Britain viewed celebrity authority and class-based exploitation disguised as entertainment before Rinder even made it out of the Good Morning Britain studio. #Farage destroys Dern and #RINDER exposed were trending on every platform across the UK. The clip of Farage reading Rinder's chavs comment had already been viewed over 6 million times on Twitter alone, with thousands of new shares every minute. TikTok was flooded with reaction videos from working class Britons who had appeared on court shows, finally seeing someone expose the contempt that they had always suspected these programs held for them. The most popular video, posted by a former Judge Rinder guest, got over 8 million views with the caption, "Finally someone told the truth about how these posh judges really see us." YouTube compilations were being created faster than anyone could keep up with, and the most popular video, titled "Nigel Farage Destroys Hypocrite Judge Rinder with His Own Words," reached over 4 million views before the day was over. The reaction from British media was immediate and chaotic. The BBC was forced to interrupt regular programming to cover what they called one of the most significant media scandals in recent British history. Sky News cleared their morning schedule to analyze the fallout from what host Kay Burley described as a complete destruction of a television personality's credibility. Even left-leaning outlets like The Guardian struggled to defend Rinder, with their editorial board writing, "While we disagree with Mr. Farage's politics, the evidence he presented raises serious questions about exploitation in reality television and the class attitudes of media figures who claim to represent progressive values." The most damaging aspect for Rinder was that ITV, which produced his show, immediately suspended him pending a full investigation. Within hours, they announced that all future episodes of Judge Rinder were canceled, and reruns were being pulled from their schedule indefinitely. Corporate sponsors fled immediately. Within 24 hours, every major company that had advertised during Rinder's show announced they were suspending their partnerships. A spokesperson for one major retailer said, "We cannot associate our brand with someone who has demonstrated such contempt for working-class customers." The legal profession's response was swift and brutal. The Bar Standards Board announced they were reviewing whether Rinder's comments violated professional conduct rules for practicing barristers. Several prominent legal organizations issued statements distancing themselves from his remarks and emphasizing that his views did not represent the legal profession. Most devastatingly, former guests from his show began coming forward with their own stories of how they had been treated behind the scenes. A factory worker from Manchester who had appeared on the show revealed, "They told me I was getting justice, but I could see them laughing at my accent during the breaks. Now I know what they really thought of me." The revelation sparked a broader investigation into the entire court show genre. Ofcom, the UK broadcasting regulator, announced a comprehensive review of all reality court programs, specifically examining their treatment of working-class participants and their casting practices. Nigel Farage, meanwhile, experienced a massive surge in popularity that extended far beyond his traditional support base. Polls conducted in the week following the confrontation showed his approval rating had increased by 15 points, with significant gains among working-class voters who felt he had exposed the contempt that metropolitan elites held for them. His interview on GB News, where he discussed the broader implications of celebrity hypocrisy and elite contempt for ordinary people, was watched by over 3 million viewers, the highest-rated political interview in the network's history. When asked if he regretted exposing Rinder so brutally, Farage replied, "I regret that it took this long for someone to tell the truth about how these people really view working-class Britons." The impact on British political discourse was immediate and significant. The confrontation became a symbol of the cultural divide that had driven Brexit, with Rinder representing everything that Leave voters had rejected about the Metropolitan. Elite establishment Conservative MPs who had previously been critical of Farage began praising his exposure of media hypocrisy. Even some Labour politicians found themselves in the awkward position of having to acknowledge that he had exposed genuine class-based exploitation in the entertainment industry. The entertainment industry went into damage control mode, with several Other reality TV personalities quietly reviewing their own private communications and public statements. The phrase, "doing a Rinder," became shorthand for being exposed as hypocritical by your own words. Universities began incorporating the Farage Rinder confrontation into media studies courses as an example of how class attitudes shaped entertainment content. Several academic papers were quickly published examining the incident as a case study in metropolitan elite attitudes toward working-class culture. The long-term consequences for Rinder were devastating and permanent. His attempted comeback interview with Channel 4 was a disaster, with viewers immediately pointing out that his apology seemed scripted and insincere. His planned autobiography was canceled by the publisher, and his speaking agency dropped him as client. Most importantly, the confrontation had fundamentally changed how British audiences viewed celebrity judges and reality television. Viewer complaints about class-based exploitation increased dramatically across all channels, forcing the industry to implement new standards for the treatment of working-class participants. Judge Rinder's career was effectively over, destroyed. Not by political opposition, but by his own words revealing his true attitude toward the people who had made him rich and famous. He had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of elite contempt and the power of authentic populist politics. To expose institutional hypocrisy, the confrontation also marked a significant moment in Nigel Farage's political rehabilitation. By exposing genuine class-based exploitation rather than engaging in typical political attacks, he had demonstrated that populist politics could serve a valuable function in holding elite institutions accountable for their treatment of ordinary people. 6 months later, polling showed that public trust in celebrity judges and court shows had declined dramatically, while support for politicians who challenged elite institutions had increased across party lines. The incident had proven that British voters were tired of being lectured by people who privately held them in contempt. As political historians began analyzing the long-term impact of the confrontation, they concluded that it represented a watershed moment in British media and politics. The moment when the metropolitan elite's condescending attitude toward working-class culture was finally exposed and rejected by the broader public. The revolution that began with Nigel Farage's preparation and Rinder's private emails had grown into a broader movement, demanding authenticity and respect from media figures who claimed to represent justice and progressive values. The British public had seen behind the curtain of celebrity authority and decided they didn't like what they found. This incredible moment represents hope for everyone who has been looked down upon by people who think their education, wealth, or television fame gives them the right to treat others as entertainment objects. If you want to see more hypocritical celebrities exposed like this, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss these epic moments of accountability. Share the story with everyone you know, because the only way we stop accepting class-based exploitation disguised as entertainment is if we all demand better. People like Judge Rinder have gotten rich by mocking working-class people while pretending to care about justice. But Nigel Farage proved that even the most protected celebrities can be held accountable when someone comes prepared with the truth. What do you think? Should more celebrity judges face consequences for exploiting working-class people for entertainment? Are you ready to challenge media figures who profit from looking down on ordinary people? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible moments when authentic politicians expose elite hypocrisy. The revolution started when one politician refused to accept condescending lectures from someone who privately mocked the very people he claimed to serve. Where it goes next is up to all of us. But one thing is certain: celebrity judges will never feel safe exploiting working-class people again, and that's exactly what justice looks like when the truth finally comes out.